We're joined now by economist and CEO of Cowrie Asset Management, Johnson Chukwu, from our Lagos studios. Johnson Chukwu, good to see you, and thanks for your time as always. Well, we're back again to this conversation of, getting to what we call the cash cow oil. And now this conversation, which we still do not have the details of those people in the NNPC. But again, let us in first on that policy statement or directive that private refineries in Nigeria should get crude in dollar, and what that could translate into Nigeria's bolstering economy.
In Naira, actually.
In Naira, I beg your pardon.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Suleiman and Ngozi. Well, the first thing I would say is that when the directive, if it's implemented, it wouldn't really change much as it relates to the national economy. Bear in mind that when Nigerian government sells crude to the oil refineries, it's going to sell the crude to the oil refineries at an exchange rate, obviously the ruling exchange rate. So the landing cost of the product of the crude to the refinery will still be the Naira equivalent of the dollar value of the crude. So when the refineries finish refining, the refineries also have to sell back the refined petroleum products to Nigerian businesses or to the government or to the local market also in Naira. So what we will at best achieve is that in terms of 20% of our current import bill, which is the proportion of our total import of petroleum product, fuel, will be converted to Naira transactions. So, but ultimately, and I think this is what we should emphasize, the issues we seem to be papering over is that crude production is not meeting up our local requirements. Average crude production in the month of July was just about 1.3 million barrels. And at that 1.3 million barrels, with NNPC share, if everything is coming from a joint venture operation, NNPC share would have been 60%. But interestingly, joint venture operation had dwindled significantly. So most of the production are coming from production sharing contracts. So in effect, our crude share, NNP share of crude production of about 1.3 million barrels, it's at best 650,000 barrels. So with that, the government will not be able to even meet its obligations to the refineries, local refineries. And we seem to be pushing and hoping that NNPC will manufacture crude. The reality is that we do not have the crude. And I think that's where the discussion should be. The discussion should center, how do we improve crude production? Instead of what we currently have, the kind of dispute we're having within the local market between Dangote Refinery and NNPC, where every argument is about give crude to the refinery. But NNPC does not have the crude. If you look at NNPC share of crude, the first thing you have to realize that there are commitments that NNP has made either in loans that we are taken back by crude production or crude swaps that we are done to bring in refined petroleum products. And I think I need to say this. Total Nigeria's import of petrol is about 21% of our total import. Whereas earnings, foreign exchange earnings from export of crude is about 81% of foreign exchange earnings. So if you even succeed, assuming we don't increase crude production, if we succeed in giving out the crude to the local refineries, we will at best save 20% of our total import bill. But we are not going to save, we are going to forgo 80% of our total export earnings. So in effect, the economy will go into crisis. And as I said, the conversation we should be having now in the country is that how do we improve crude production so that we will have the incremental crude we can give to Dangote Refinery, give to other local refineries. Anything short of that, we are just dancing around the issue.
So what you're saying, all this excitement about Dangote Refinery coming on stream, really is much ado about nothing. And two questions. How do we ramp up local production? And number two, why has NNPCL not been able to meet its, equity interest in Dangote Refinery?
Okay, let me start from the first part of your question. How do we ramp up? Which is what I said, that should be the conversation we should be having. Instead of these issues we're having, these arguments about NNP supply to Dangote Refinery. The first thing we have to look at what are we producing today? If you look at the OPEC report that shows our crude production in the month of July was only 1.3 million barrels a day, so that's what we're producing. Dangote requires about 650,000 barrels a day. If you add the other local refineries, in fact, the report I saw says that the local refineries need about 597,000 barrels a day the second half of this year. That is far above the NNP's share of crude production in the country. So unless we ratchet up crude production, and your question is how do we ratchet up crude production? The first you have to look at, we have to address the issue of crude oil pipeline breaches, crude oil theft, which I was quite happy when the NNPC GM, they had a meeting with law enforcement, the naval officers and other military personnel to help fight this battle on crude production. But it's not going to be a light bulb effect, because in the first place, exploration of crude had actually dwindled over years. So you have to go back to exploration. Most of the onshore assets are not producing, they are locked up. And it's not just something that you open in a week or two. So you have to go back to bringing investment into the upstream sector of the Nigerian economy. And we know today that most of the IOCs have actually sold their onshore assets and shallow offshore assets. So it will take some time for us to ratchet up production back to 2 billion barrels. Government is promising end of this year, but I think that's very optimistic. At best, if we can achieve that, assuming we're able to bring security issues around the Niger Delta under control, maybe in the next 1.5 years, we should begin to see production back to about 1.2 million barrels a day. A lot of investment has to go into that place. The government has to enforce the Petroleum Industry Act. But most importantly, the government must ensure that it has control over security issues around the Niger Delta. A lot of schemes have been put in place. They don't seem to be working well. I looked at the records of our crude production in the past 4 months. In March, crude production was about 1.23 million barrels a day. It moved to 1.28 million barrels a day in April, dropped again to 1.25 million barrels in May, only to go back to 1.27 million barrels in June and 1.3 million barrels in July. That will show you that clearly that the economy does not have the capacity, the economy does not have the capacity to meet 2 million barrels. And for you to meet the domestic crude obligations of the refineries, we should be talking of crude production in the region of 2.5 million barrels. So we should just stop the issues about give them crude. We should focus on how do we improve crude production. And I think fighting the insecurity in Niger Delta, getting a share of the heart of the residents of that area, and that's very critical. The people in that area must feel that the national economic interest is also their interest. We must align the interests of the locals in the Niger Delta area to the national interest. And that's the only way they can, and I think the Petroleum Industry Act that made provision for what they call host community fund has tried to align that, but the implementation will become the issue because crude production is quite low. The second aspect of your question is, why is it that NNPC is not able to meet the demand, their equity stake in Dangote refinery? In the first place, you have to realize that NNPC also is going through a lot of financial stress. NNPC is borrowing even on the part of the federal, on the behalf of the federal government with the resources of the crude that he should have actually held. Remember that August last year, NNPC borrowed $3 billion from Afrexim on behalf of the federal government to help stabilize the exchange rate. That payment for that loan is about 90,000 barrels a day. So if NNPC is borrowing, committing its resources to fund the national treasury, then it has limited headroom to continue to invest in critical and long-term assets. So I think what would have happened, I'm not a spokesman for NNPC, I think what would have happened is that NNPC is financially constrained to fully explore or take up their equity allotment from NNPC. And that's obviously why they stopped at 1 million barrels and about 7.2% of Dangote refinery equity holding.
I think it looks like a fine place for us to leave it. You've practically touched on every aspect of this conversation. We'd like to thank you for your insights, Johnson Chukwu, CEO of Cowry Asset Management Limited. Thank you for your time.